Welcome to the RWSN webinar on exploring the WHO-UNICEF JMP Global Database on Inequalities in WASH Services. The WHO-UNICEF Joint Monitoring Programme, or the JMP, was established in 1990 to produce internationally comparable estimates of progress on drinking water, sanitation and hygiene, or WASH. Our presenters today are Tom Slaymaker, who leads the UNICEF side, and Rick Johnston, who leads the WHO side of the JMP. The JMP was previously responsible for monitoring the Millennium Development Goals and is now responsible for global monitoring of the Sustainable Development Goal targets related to WASH. For detailed guidance on the new SDG indicators relating to WASH in households, please see our core questions for monitoring water, sanitation and hygiene in household surveys. In 2017, the JMP published its first global baseline estimates for the new SDG indicators, and in 2019, we published a progress update with a special focus on inequalities. During this webinar, we will be exploring these latest estimates from the JMP global databases on inequalities in WASH services. As many of you will know, the JMP uses service ladders to benchmark and compare progress on drinking water, sanitation and hygiene across countries, and these have been updated for SDG monitoring. The new ladders build on the established improved, unimproved technology classification, which was used for MDG monitoring, and introduce additional criteria relating to the level of service provided to households. These ladders were introduced in the 2017 report, and the core questions document goes into detail about survey questions that can be used to collect data from the different indicators. For drinking water, improved sources are those which by nature of their design and construction have the potential to deliver safe water. These include piped water, boreholes or tube wells, protected wells and springs, rainwater and packaged or delivered water. The JMP continues to track the population using unimproved sources such as unprotected wells and unprotected springs, and those that drink water directly from surface water sources such as rivers, lakes, ponds and irrigation canals. But for the purposes of SDG reporting, the population using improved sources are divided into three categories. If households use an improved source from which a round trip to collect water, including queuing, exceeds 30 minutes, we call this a limited service. And provided collection time is 30 minutes or less, then it counts as a basic service. But in order to meet the SDG criteria for a safely managed drinking water service, households must use an improved source that is located on premises, available when needed, and free from contamination. For sanitation, improved facilities are those designed to hygienically separate excreta from human contact and include flush and pour flush to piped sewers, septic tanks or pit latrines, VIPs, composting toilets or pit latrines with slabs. In order to meet the SDG criteria for safely managed service, people should use improved sanitation facilities that are not shared with other households and where excreta are either safely disposed of in situ or transported and treated off-site. If excreta are not safely managed, then people using those facilities are classed as having a basic service, unless they're shared with other households, in which case they count as a limited service. The JMP also continues to report on the population using unimproved facilities, such as pit latrines without slabs, hanging latrines and bucket latrines, and those who do not use any kind of toilet and practice open defecation. For hygiene, the new SDG indicator focuses on the presence of hand washing facilities with soap and water available on premises, which is considered a basic service. If households have a facility but lack water or soap, this counts as a limited service, and the JMP also reports on the population with no hand washing facility at all. The JMP continues to report on all rungs on each ladder in order to track the progressive reduction of inequalities in service levels between countries and between different populations within countries. The 2019 Progress Update presented national, regional and global estimates of progress between 2000 and 2017. It included global estimates of trends in safely managed drinking water and safely managed sanitation, and the first ever global estimate for hygiene. These global ladders show the headline statistics on inequalities in WASH services. In 2017, 71% of the population used safely managed drinking water services, rising from 61% in 2000. This means that 2.2 billion still lacked safely managed drinking water, including 1.4 billion using a basic service and 206 million using a limited service, exceeding 30 minutes collection time. 435 million used unimproved sources and 144 million still used surface water. 45% of the population used safely managed sanitation services, compared with 28% in 2000. This means that 4.2 billion still lacked safely managed sanitation, including 2.2 billion using a basic service, 627 million sharing a limited sanitation service, 701 million using unimproved facilities, and 673 million still practicing open defecation. 60% of the global population had basic hand washing facilities with soap and water available at home, and this means that 3 billion people still lacked basic hand washing facilities at home, among whom 1.6 billion had limited facilities lacking soap or water, and 1.4 billion had no facility at all. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is very ambitious. It commits UN member states to take bold and transformative steps to realise the human rights of all, end poverty in all its forms, and ensure that no one will be left behind. In order to track progress in reducing inequalities, the 2030 Agenda document states that SDG indicators should be disaggregated where relevant by income, sex, age, race, ethnicity, migratory status, disability, and geographic location or other characteristics. This means that each government is expected to determine the most relevant dimensions of inequality in wash services in their country context, for example, slum dwellers or ethnic minorities or indigenous groups, and to develop mechanisms to identify and monitor the situation of these disadvantaged groups. The commitment to leave no one behind implies that in addition to tracking overall rates of progress on wash services, governments should also focus on closing the gap in service levels between disadvantaged groups and the rest of the population, as illustrated in the chart on the right-hand side. This is also consistent with the idea of progressive realisation of the human rights to safe water and sanitation. But monitoring inequalities presents a huge challenge. The JMP Global Database on Inequalities has been substantially expanded in recent years and now includes estimates for both facility type and service levels, which can be aggregated at country, regional, and global scales. The JMP estimates for facility type and service levels are routinely disaggregated by urban and rural areas, and further disaggregation by sub-national region and by wealth quintile is now possible for nearly 100 countries. The national data sources in the JMP Global Database generally do not allow for disaggregation by sex or age, race, ethnicity, migratory status or disability, but JMP reports do highlight these wherever national data allow. The purpose of this webinar is to teach you how to navigate the data portal on the JMP website and how to make the most of the JMP Global Database on inequalities in drinking water, sanitation and hygiene services. In the following slides, we're going to explain how to navigate the data portal and how to find and download country files and inequality files, which contain a complete list of all national data sources available for the 232 countries, areas and territories in the JMP Global Databases. We're then going to show you how to create, edit, download and share custom charts and tables for specific indicators of inequality and geographic areas of interest. We'll give a series of short demonstrations of the main features of the JMP data portal, and after each one, we'll give you a quick exercise so that you can try it for yourself. The data portal works in much the same way for the data on washing schools and washing healthcare facilities. We won't show those today, but you should be able to navigate them once you're comfortable with the washing households database. So let's start with navigating the data portal. Here you see on the left the home page of the JMP website. The website has different sections, and you can download our reports, you can read about monitoring water, sanitation and hygiene in different settings, and you can learn more about how we work. But today we're going to focus on the data portal, which you can enter in a few different ways. One way is to use the drop-down menu under Data in the black menu bar at the top. That gives you the option of exploring our databases on households, on schools, or on healthcare facilities. Another shortcut is to just enter the name of the country you want on the homepage, where it says Start Typing a Country Name. We use a blue border for households, SDG 6, a red border for schools, SDG 4, and a green border for healthcare facilities, SDG 3. And you can switch from one setting to another at any time. But for this webinar, we're going to focus on WASH in households. This is what the main page of the data portal looks like for households. Here you'll find some basic summary graphics on water, sanitation and hygiene at the global level. We'll come back to these later on. You can also select a particular country by using the drop-down menus, or by simply clicking on the map on the right. Once a country has been selected, the graphs on the left are updated to show the latest statistics for that country. We'll learn how to edit those graphs later, but let's start by downloading the Brazil country file. This is an Excel spreadsheet that contains a complete list of all national data sources that the JMP has for a particular country. To get to the country file, click on the box marked Download Data. And now you're at the Downloads page of the website. You can see the list of country files for WASH in households, as well as a list of country files for schools and for healthcare facilities. Also, for some countries, the JMP now has more detailed inequalities files. First, let's take a quick look at the country file for Brazil. JMP country files have lots of different sheets in them. This is a picture of the introduction sheet, which contains links to all the other sheets. The country file provides a complete record of all of the data currently available from national data sources and shows how these correspond with the international definitions and which ones have been used to produce JMP country estimates. We don't have time to explore the different sheets in detail now, but we've tried to make them self-explanatory and encourage you to explore them on your own. A good place to start is on the ladders sheet because it summarises the latest JMP estimates for water, sanitation and hygiene. You can see that in Brazil we have estimates for safely managed drinking water in urban areas and safely managed sanitation in both urban areas and at the national level. But we don't have any information at all about hygiene, that is, the availability of hand washing facilities with soap and water at home. The data summary sheet contains a complete list of all national data sources which the JMP currently has on file for each country. Brazil is one of our most data-rich countries. We have 63 data sources, including household surveys, censuses, and administrative data. Let's go back to the Downloads page and take a quick look at one of the inequalities files. We don't have one of these for Brazil, so let's download the inequalities file for Colombia instead. And one more thing to say about the Downloads page before we go to Colombia. If you scroll up to the top of this page, you'll find what we call a world file, which is an Excel sheet that summarises the estimates for all countries in the world. There's also a regional file, which gives the estimates for the SDG regions. These are very similar to the statistical tables in the back of our reports and are useful if you want to download and analyse data from a lot of countries at once. Just like the country files, the inequalities files have an introduction sheet which shows that there are inequalities data available from 4 different data inputs, which in the case of Colombia are the Demographic and Health Surveys, or DHS, from 2000, 2005, 2010 and 2015. For each of these surveys, we have WASH data disaggregated by wealth quintile and also by subnational region. Also note that the inequalities files need to run macros, so you may need to click on buttons that say Enable Editing and Enable Content if these appear when the file opens in Excel. The inequalities files currently only include estimates for basic water, sanitation and hygiene services. Here you can see trends in basic sanitation between 2000 and 2017 by wealth quintile. It's clear that while the richest people in Colombia have very high coverage, 96 or 97%, they've had high coverage for a long time, and those in the poorest quintiles are gradually catching up These inequalities files show trends in service coverage by wealth quintile and also have detailed data by wealth quintile and subnational region for each of the surveys available. If you select the sheets for individual surveys, you can view data disaggregated by wealth quintiles and also by subnational area. The Go-To radio buttons can be used to switch between displaying wealth quintiles and subnational regions and between water, sanitation and hygiene. Here you can see that in the 2015 DHS in Colombia, there were 6 different subnational areas, and the use of surface water varied from 0 in Bogota, the capital region, to about 6% in the central and oriental regions. These files also show you the detailed response categories, like household connections or piped water, and how those vary by wealth quintile or subnational region. This is useful if you want to do more detailed analysis of differences in the types of supplies that people use. Okay, let's put you all to work now with our first exercise. You'll need to go to the website washdata.org and download 2 country files. First, download the country file for Chad and open it. Can you find the most recent national data source in the JMP database? If you finish that, go on and download the inequalities file for Nepal and take a look at the progress that's been made in basic sanitation. For the different wealth quintiles, can you see which wealth quintile recorded the biggest change between 2000 and 2017? We'll take about 4 minutes, and if you finish both tasks, you can explore the JMP country files in more detail. And if you can't access the website or can't open the Excel files, it's a great time to take a break. We'll see you in about 4 minutes. Okay, I hope everyone was able to find the country file for Chad. On the data summary sheet, you can see that for Chad, we have 8 sources of national data, 7 surveys and 1 census from 1990. For SDG reporting, the JMP only uses data from 2000 onwards, so really it's just these 6 surveys, with the most recent one dating from 2015. But there is a new mix planned for Chad for 2020, so hopefully we'll soon have more data. And for Nepal, we like to show Nepal because, especially in rural areas on the right, you can see really tremendous progress in sanitation across all wealth quintiles, and especially among the poorest. And in urban areas, the poor are making faster progress than the rich, and therefore closing the gap in coverage. In many other countries, the poorest quintile stays stagnant until the richest people are close to 100%. I hope that you were able to find both files. I'll put the link to the downloads page into the chat box. Next, we'll see how to navigate the data portal and create and download data tables. There are a lot of different ways to explore the JMP database through the website. You can create custom maps, charts, and tables on the website. Let's start with a table. Click on the View Data Table tab, and if you've got your web browser open, you can do this on your own computer. Otherwise, you can see the slides. Here's the default table of WASH services by SDG region. There's a control panel on the left where you can adjust what appears in the table. You can change the geography at the top of the control panel, and right now it's set up for SDG regions, but there are other kinds of regions as well, WHO and UNICEF regions, for example. But the geography can also be individual countries or subnational regions within a country. There are also specific measures, drinking water, sanitation and hygiene, which can be selected. Then there are inequalities, and here you can see total, rural and urban are all selected. For individual countries, wealth quintiles can also be selected. There are also different ladder types, and the default is showing the service levels, which correspond to the rungs on the JMP service ladders. But you could show instead the facility type, or the different criteria for safely managed services. Finally, you can select 1 year or multiple years. The default is for the most recent year, which is currently 2017. If you click on any of the column headers, you can sort that column, and you can download the data by clicking the Download as CSV button. Once you've got the data downloaded, you can do anything you want with them. Now for exercise number 2. First, can you make a table showing JMP estimates for rural water services, that's all rungs on the drinking water service ladder, for all 14 countries in the SDG region of Central and Southern Asia in the year 2017. And if you finish that, make a second table showing access to basic and limited hand washing facilities in subnational regions of Senegal in 2017. Again, you'll have about 4 minutes for this exercise. So, to make a table for 14 countries at once, there's a trick. In the geography control, when you select countries, you can select groups all at once by region. So all you have to do is to find the Central and Southern Asia SDG region and select it. Also note that the countries are sorted by SDG region, but you could also sort them by other regions, like WHO or UNICEF, for example. And I've selected just drinking water and only rural and only the poorest. But of course, you could do any combination of those. Then, for the Senegal example, what you need to do is first select subnational region in the geography control, and then for country select Senegal. The default is to show all regions, and here you can see that coverage of basic hygiene is over 60% in 2 of those regions, including Dakar, but is below 10% in 8 regions. Because the survey that these data come from is from 2017, the data show up automatically. If you select a country that has subnational data for other years, you won't see anything immediately. It will say no data available in the table. But if you check the box that says latest data available, the table will be updated with the relevant data. You can get a lot of information by creating tables, but sometimes a chart is an even more powerful way of showing data and highlighting inequalities. Let's learn how to do those on the website next. There are 5 kinds of charts that can be made on the website. We'll start with ladder charts. Let's go back to the data home page where we started. On the right, you have a map of the world, which you can use to select countries. And on the left, you have 4 charts that have already been prepared. You can edit any one of those by clicking the Edit button next to them. We have 2 bar charts on the top showing the different water, sanitation and hygiene ladders, and we call these ladder charts. Then on the bottom, you have 2 charts showing trends over time, and we call these trend charts. These 4 charts are summaries of all of the different indicators for water, sanitation and hygiene. But you can also focus in on any one of these service types. Let's click the words drinking water that are just under the download data button. And now we see 4 charts all about drinking water. There's a ladder chart and a trend chart on the left. And on the right, we have 2 charts that are ranking countries based on different indicators. Those are called rank charts. Let's start to edit the ladder chart in the upper left corner by clicking on the blue Edit button. Okay, now we're editing this ladder chart, which shows the drinking water ladder at the global scale for urban and for rural areas, and for 2000 and for 2017. On the left-hand side, you have a control panel, similar to the one we saw earlier with the table. And on the right side, you see the chart. At the very bottom right of the chart, you see a blue button with some tags or labels on it. If you click that, you will see data labels on the chart. Let's do that. Now you can see the data labels, showing, for example, that safely managed drinking water in rural areas has increased from 39% to 53% between 2000 and 2017, while in urban areas, coverage has actually decreased slightly from 86% to 85%. Now, let's look more into the control panel. At the top of the control panel, you have the geography section with a drop-down menu. Here you can select the world, or different regions or countries, or subnational regions within a country. And next you have the measures. You can select either coverage or population, and you can select any combination of drinking water, sanitation and hygiene. Let's switch to population instead of coverage. Okay, now for populations, we can see that the urban population with safely managed drinking water increased by 1 billion, from 2.5 billion to 3.5 billion between 2000 and 2017, while the rural population with safely managed drinking water only increased by 500 million to 1.8 billion over the same period of time. But you can also see that the total population, shown at the top of the ladders, increased a lot more in urban areas than in rural areas. And that's why, when we were only looking at coverage, it looked like things were stagnating in urban areas, while actually coverage was just keeping up with population growth. The next section of the control panel is inequalities. Here you can select total, rural or urban, and for some country charts you can also select wealth quintiles here. Below that you have ladder type, and we're looking at service level ladders. And you could select whether you want to show all or just some of the service levels. But there are other types of ladders too. We could show facility type, and for water that means piped or non-piped improved sources. Or we could show individual criteria for safely managed services. Is water accessible on premises, available when needed, or free from contamination? Finally, you can select the time period. Here we've selected 2000 and 2017, but you could choose whichever years you like. Let's look at the facility type ladder and also add the total numbers along with rural and urban ones that we already have. Let's also change the years to 2012 and 2017 to see change over a shorter time period. Here you go. Now let's look at what we can do in the chart area. First, there's a space for a title or a caption on the top. You can change that to anything you like. On the right, you see the legend keys, non-piped and piped, and if you click on those, you can turn each one on or off. It has the same effect as selecting the checkboxes for piped and non-piped in the control panel on the left. Then there are the data labels. We've seen that you can turn those on or off with the buttons on the bottom right. And the other buttons you see are about saving or sharing a chart. On the top right, you see a few green buttons, and these are for sharing the chart through what we call a dashboard. One looks like a plus sign, and that's for adding another chart to this grid. We'll do that later. The second is for sharing the grid. If you click that, you'll get a very long URL, which will always have this chart, so you could share it and know it will not change. And the third button is to save this grid and get a URL for sharing. This makes a shorter URL that you can send to anyone, but they can edit and change it. Let's make a URL for sharing. We'll call these dashboards. There you go. Dashboard 3029 has been created, and you could email this link to anyone and show them the chart. You can also download the chart as an image with the blue image button near the bottom. And a really useful feature is that you can download the chart as a CSV file with the blue button in the middle at the bottom left corner. Let's do that. And then you can access the data in Excel to make your own graphics or other analysis. This is a pretty simple chart, but you could do this for much more complex ones and still get the data you want. Note that even though the chart was showing the population, the Excel file gives you both population and coverage. So this is a summary of the different types of controls you have for the ladder charts, but most of these apply to the other chart types as well. We've seen that in the control panel on the left, you can select the geography, the measure, and inequalities of interest, and also that you can choose different types of ladders. And finally, you can select different years. And in the chart panel on the right, you can edit the title and switch legend keys and data labels on or off. You can add more charts to the dashboard, and you can download the data from each of the charts as an Excel file or as an image. Let's turn now to another kind of chart, the rank chart. These look similar to the ladder charts.
If you go back to the data homepage and click the button that says Create New Chart, you will see the 5 kinds of charts you can make. We've just been working on ladder charts. Let's now select a rank chart. Here's the default rank chart, which is showing all countries in the world ranked by the combination of basic and safely managed drinking water. That's what we call at least basic services, because some countries lack data on water quality, so don't have estimates for safely managed drinking water. You can see here that Australia is shown as having 99.97% basic services, but there's no information on safely managed services. That doesn't mean that no one in Australia has safely managed services. It just means that there aren't yet national data available on water quality to make a national estimate of safely managed drinking water services. On the left side, you see the control panel, which looks very similar to the one we worked with for the ladder charts, but there are some differences. First, in the geography section, we've selected to rank countries within the whole world. We could also choose to rank regions or to rank countries within regions, and we can also rank subnational regions within a country. Next, in measures, you will see a number of new measures that weren't available in the ladder charts. We still have coverage and population, but also now we have a measure of change, the percentage point change between 2000 and 2017, as well as two measures of inequalities, the percentage point difference between the richest and poorest wealth quintiles, and the difference between the highest and lowest subnational regions. Finally, at the bottom, there's a new control. You can choose to display the top 10, the bottom 10, or all countries being ranked. Let's change the geography to subnational regions and look at open defecation. Here I've selected to rank subnational regions, and then I had a choice among different countries. I picked Nigeria and decided to look at open defecation. The chart shows that there's a 36-point gap between the highest region, North Central, where 50% of the population practices open defecation, and the lowest region, Northwest, at only 14%. We have estimates disaggregated by subnational region for about 100 countries. These can also be seen in the inequalities files we looked at earlier. The subnational data all come from specific household surveys, and some countries have multiple surveys, which again you can see in the inequalities file. Nigeria, for example, has subnational data for 2017, but also for 7 other years, ranging from 2003 to 2015. These could be selected using the time period drop-down menu. You can see a summary of the same information through selecting the measure of subnational inequalities, percentage point difference. Here we see the different countries in the SDG region of sub-Saharan Africa ranked by the gap between the highest and lowest regions for open defecation. And there's Nigeria with that 36-point gap between the highest and lowest regions, which is much more of a gap than you see in Rwanda or Malawi, but much less than that seen in Togo, Somalia, or Ghana. But you have to be careful with this analysis, because a country that has a lot of subnational regions is more likely to have a big difference between the highest and lowest. For example, the data from Somalia draw upon 17 different subnational regions, while for Rwanda it is only 5. But also, open defecation is very low in general in Rwanda, so the gap is not very large. The number of people living in each subnational region also varies widely, which means you have to be careful when comparing coverage. There are other measures that can be selected. This chart shows the percentage point change over 2000 to 2017 in at least basic water services in rural areas of the SDG region of Latin America and the Caribbean, and shows that in Paraguay, this increased by 47 percentage points, while in Nicaragua, it actually decreased by 4 percentage points. You can also rank countries on the basis of the difference between the richest and poorest quintiles. Here you see at least basic sanitation in the 6 countries of Southern Asia. That's what's called an M49 subregion. These are just geographical zones that are a bit smaller than the SDG regions. The ladder and rank charts are very powerful, and you can do a lot with them. For this exercise, let's have you make one ladder chart showing the drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene service level ladders in the SDG region of Latin America and the Caribbean for 2017. And if you finish that, then you can open another window in your browser and make a rank chart that shows access to basic and limited hand washing facilities by subnational regions in Senegal in 2017. See you in 4 minutes. How did you get on? For the latter chart, you should have selected the region type of SDG regions and then selected Latin America and the Caribbean. For measures, you should have selected drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene, and for inequalities, you should have selected total, rural, and urban. And 2017 is already the default time period unless you decide to change it. The rank chart shows the same data that we made earlier in the tables about hand washing in Senegal. There are 2 regions with more than 60% basic hand washing and 8 with 10% or less. Here we also see how many people have limited hand washing facilities. That's having hand washing facilities but lacking either soap or water. The next type of chart we will look at is called an inequality chart. Once again, let's go back to the home page and click Create New Chart, but this time choose the inequality chart. The default chart here is for drinking water coverage in Afghanistan by wealth quintile. The household surveys collect information about what kind of assets are owned by household members. Animals, bicycles, watches, refrigerators, TVs, etc. and use these to group households into quintiles, or groups of 20% of the population. So the poorest quintile represents the 20% of people who have the fewest assets. These wealth quintiles are a good way to measure wealth without having to ask a lot of questions about income. It can be interesting to compare multiple countries, especially within the same region. You can select up to 15 countries at a time. Here I've used the M49 subregion group to select all 8 countries from South America. Remember we saw earlier that Colombia had big differences in basic sanitation between the richest and the poorest, and many of the countries in South America have similar trends. There is higher coverage and less inequality in Uruguay, but in Bolivia, where overall sanitation coverage is lower, the inequalities are also more pronounced. If you look at rural areas, the inequalities are even greater, and I've turned on the data labels here using the button in the bottom right corner so you can see the values. Right now, you can only show the basic service levels on these inequalities charts, but we'd like to add facility type and, if possible, safely managed services in the future. Next, let's look at the trend charts. By now, you know how to create a new chart from the home page, but you can also do this from a chart you are already working on. If you click on the green plus sign in the upper right-hand corner that says Add a new chart to this grid, you can create a new chart on the same page as the one you were already working on. You can create up to 4 charts on a single grid and save them as dashboards for sharing. Let's click on the trend chart icon. And now you see the default trend chart, which is for sanitation at the global level, in the bottom half of this grid. We can edit this in the usual way with the control panel. One thing that's different for trend charts is that you can select both the start and the end years. Of course, you can only show trends for one geography at a time, and let's change the geography to the M49 subregion of South America to match the wealth quintile chart. And finally, if we deselect open defecation, unimproved, and limited services, then we have a trend chart for rural basic sanitation in South America, going up from 42% in 2000 to 68% in 2017. And you could save this as a dashboard and send it to your colleagues. For the next exercise, let's create an inequalities chart showing the use of surface water for drinking in rural areas by wealth quintile for the 15 countries of Western Africa. And a hint, you can use the M49 subregion to select all these countries at once. And if you finish with that, then create a trend chart showing the change in piped water and non-piped improved water for the M49 subregion of Western Africa from 2000 to 2017. See you in a few minutes. Here I've used the M49 subregion of Western Africa to select the 15 countries, and you can see that in many countries surface water use is not very common, but that there are 4 countries where at least a quarter of the rural poorest population drinks surface water, with Liberia having the greatest number at 53%. I've made a dashboard with 3 different charts showing the total population in the bottom and the rural and urban populations above. These are showing the numbers of people, and you can see that there has been a slight growth in the number of people with piped water in both urban and rural areas, but a much larger growth in the number of people with non-piped improved water supplies, like boreholes and dug wells, in both urban and rural areas. And in both urban and rural areas, there were about 100 million people using non-piped improved water in 2017. I've saved this one as a dashboard, number 23031, which any of you could edit and change. And I've also made a permanent link, which I renamed with tiny URL, which is locked. If you look at the same data, but in terms of the proportion of the population that has coverage, you can see that in urban areas, the proportion of people with piped water has been going down steadily. But we saw on the last slide that the actual number has been increasing. It's just that the urban population is increasing faster than the piped water services can keep up with. The last type of chart is called a progress chart. Sometimes we call them triangle charts for obvious reasons. Here are the default settings for the progress chart. This chart shows how many countries, and which countries, are on track to achieve nearly universal basic water services by 2030. The way we make these charts is, we start with the coverage in 2017. You can see that on the horizontal axis, ranging from about 40% to nearly 100%. It doesn't go all the way to 100%, because in the control panel on the left, there's a setting to show only those that where at least 1% of the population did not have the target coverage in 2017. We could change that to 0 and then see all countries at 100%, but there's no point in doing that because they're already at universal coverage. So we're interested in the countries that weren't yet at universal coverage in 2017. Next, we look at the historical rate of progress, and that's shown on the vertical axis. This is just the coverage in 2017 minus the coverage in 2000 divided by 17, which gives an annual rate of change. You can see that most countries have achieved a rate of progress of about 1 or 2 percentage points per year. There are just a few that have gotten more than 2 percentage points per year, and you can see Afghanistan highlighted here at 2.3 percentage points per year. But in 2017, Afghanistan had only 67.1% coverage with basic water, and if they would continue at 2.3 percentage points per year, we would expect them to reach 97% coverage by 2030. And that's just a little bit less than universal coverage, so Afghanistan plots in the yellow triangle, which means that there is progress, but that it is too slow to reach universal coverage by 2030. If we look just at sub-Saharan Africa, there are 2 countries that are on track for universal coverage by 2030. I've done this by changing the geography to the SDG region of sub-Saharan Africa, but you could also use the dynamic legend labels from the last chart. Mali had 78.3% coverage in 2017 and an average rate of progress of 1.7 percentage points per year, which is just enough to reach 100% by 2030. And the other country that's on track is Botswana. Of course, we know that reaching the last 20% or the last 5% of the population can take more time and effort because they are particularly hard to reach. And also, we know that the progress in the next 10 years isn't necessarily going to be the same as the progress over the last 20 years. We would hope to see some acceleration. If we switch to rural areas, we see that the coverage in Mali is lower in rural areas, only 68%, So the rate of progress isn't sufficient to reach 100% by 2030, even though the historical rate of progress is slightly higher than the national level. So here, Mali plots in the yellow triangle. So that's a bit strange. How can a country be on track at the national level, but not on track at the rural level? It's just because those averages hide inequalities, and in reality, there are populations that make progress at different rates that you can't see just by looking at the national picture. Finally, you can adjust the controls in the control panel to look at different coverage targets and different timelines. If we set the target coverage to 60% instead of 100%, basic water in rural areas, and then change the target year from 2030 to 2050, you can see that most countries, 20 out of 30, are on track to reach at least 60% coverage by 2050. Of course, that's a lot less ambitious than the SDGs, and this kind of target doesn't necessarily make sense, but you can see what's possible to do on the website. Also, there are countries that are making negative progress, like Burkina Faso, where the proportion of population with basic water services in rural areas has actually been decreasing, not increasing. Obviously, the countries in this orange zone of negative progress need to find ways to reverse this trend. And this is the last exercise. Can you just make one progress chart showing how many countries are on track to eliminate the use of surface water to bring it below 1% in rural areas by 2030? To make this chart, all we had to do was change the default from basic water coverage to no surface water, and to change from total to rural areas. You can see that 20 of the 71 countries that had at least 1% of the population in rural areas drinking surface water in 2017 were on track to eliminate surface water use by 2030. And Sierra Leone is on track, making good progress of about 2 percentage points per year. There's just one more feature to mention. If you go back to the data homepage, you'll see on the right-hand side there's a button to create a map. If you click on that button, you get this default map with the same type of controls that we've seen in the charts. We don't have time to give examples of making maps, and honestly, we haven't developed this feature of the website as much, and it still has some problems, but it's there for you to play around with if you like. So we've come to the end of the demonstration, and now we're going to move to an open discussion. I hope that you've learned how to do the things that we set as objectives in the beginning, as well as any other goals that you might have had. We still have some time available to answer any questions that you have and to have a discussion about how you might be able to use the data portal.